On the far edge of Sector 9 stood a broken space station held together by rust and forgotten promises inside. It was the Red Fawn Bar, a place feared by some and loved by others, a place where laws bent and fists flew louder than words. Aliens of all shapes and sizes gathered there to drink, to fight, and to bet credits on anything that moved or bled. The Red Fawn Bar was packed that night. The air was thick with smoke. Neon lights flickered above the cracked walls. Music roared through dented speakers, and every table overflowed with shouting laughter and slamming mugs. Tall insectoids with long curved claws drank beside short furry brutes with glowing eyes. Rock-skinned warriors arm-wrestled giant lizard folk as snake-eyed mercs watched from dark corners, sharp weapons always close. But something felt different, something quiet, something still. At table 9, a lone human said he did not speak, he did not laugh. He just drank slowly, his hands steady, his eyes colder than space itself. He wore a torn jacket with burn marks across one sleeve. His face was scarred, his knuckles bruised, but he looked calm, too calm. Nobody knew his name, but whispers had already begun. They said he was from Earth. They said Earth was a death world. They said only the toughest creatures could survive there. Some called him mad, some called him brave, but most just called him dangerous. The bartender, an old, three-eyed alien with a twisted horn, stopped cleaning glasses for a moment and stared at him. He had seen fighters, he had seen killers, but there was something in this human silence that made even him uneasy. Across the room, a drunk alien bumped into another, then stumbled toward table 9, his steps slow and clumsy, his breath thick with alcohol. He was a thick-armed beast with rough skin and 2 tusks sticking out from his lower jaw. He looked down at the human, who still said nothing. The alien's elbow knocked the mug from the table. It hit the floor, and shattered drink splashed across the human's boots. A small silence grew around them as nearby aliens turned their heads and watched. The human did not move at first. He just looked up, his face blank, his eyes empty, but cold like ice. The alien laughed, loudly pointing at the human and saying in a deep voice, "Humans are soft." That single sentence echoed louder than the music, louder than the laughter, even louder than the buzzing lights above. The bartender's heart skipped. He took one small step back, slowly putting down the glass. He was cleaning without blinking. He knew what was coming. He had seen it before, not often, but enough times to know the signs. He remembered the last time a human got pushed too far and the blood that followed. He looked at table 9 and whispered a small prayer to any star god that would listen. Other aliens started watching more closely. Some smiled, some leaned in for a better view. Others whispered bets under their breath. How many seconds would the human last? Would he cry? Would he beg? Would he die before the first punch? But the human remained still. His hands stayed on the table, his eyes locked on the drunk alien, who now leaned closer, breathing into his face. "What are you going to do, human?" the alien snarled. "You going to cry or run?" The human blinked once slowly, then stood from his chair. He did not raise his fist. He did not speak. He simply stood and faced the alien, whose grin began to fade. Around them, more aliens fell silent. Even the music seemed to quiet. The room held its breath. The bartender stepped back again, his hand reaching under the counter for the panic button, but he paused, his fingers hovering, unsure if calling security now would help or make things worse. Then a voice from the back said, "5 credits on the tusked guy." Another replied, 10 on the human. The room waited. The human stepped forward just once, slow and calm and quiet like a ghost in steel boots, and something behind his eyes changed, not rage, not fear, but something deeper, something ancient and terrible. The alien raised a hand to shove him. The human caught it without effort, without noise, without even blinking. And then everything began to change. The human stood still, his hand holding the alien's wrist in a grip that looked soft, but the alien's face twisted with pain. His grin was gone, his eyes wide, his mouth open, but no words came out. The crowd leaned closer. Some gasped, some laughed, some were already counting credits. The human looked into the alien's face, not angry, not wild, just calm like the stillness before a storm. The tusked alien tried to pull back, but his arm would not move. His legs shook. He growled and tried to punch with his other hand. The human ducked low with speed too fast for anyone to see. His hand moved once, and the alien dropped to the floor like a heavy sack. His body twisted, his mouth groaning, his eyes rolling. The room froze again. The music had stopped. Someone had shut it off without even noticing. Then another alien stood from nearby, table a tall one with glowing blue skin and 4 arms. He cracked his knuckles and stepped forward grinning. "You think that was something?" he said. "Let me show you how a real warrior fights." The human turned to face him, still calm, still silent. The 4-armed alien moved fast, his arms spinning like blades, each hand aimed for a part of the human's body. But the human stepped once to the side, then once more, and then his foot slammed into the alien's knee with a sound like a breaking bone. The alien screamed and dropped to the floor, clutching his leg, his other hands reaching out for balance. But the human gave him none. His elbow came down hard on the alien's shoulder, and the cracking sound was louder this time. 2 fights, 2 fallen aliens, and the human had not spoken a single word. The bartender watched with wide eyes, his hands shaking behind the counter, his mind racing through escape routes and old memories. He had seen aliens fight. He had seen blood and fire and blasters. But this was something else. This was cold. This was clean. This was human. Another alien screamed and charged, a giant rock-skinned one with heavy fists and red eyes. He roared as he ran, his footsteps shaking the floor. The human moved like smoke, like wind, like death. He dropped low and rolled under the charging alien, then rose behind him and slammed both fists into the back of the giant's knees. The rock-skinned brute fell forward, crashing into a table, his head smashing through wood, and metal has grown muffled by the debris. By now the bar was chaos. Some aliens ran, some cheered, others reached for weapons, but the bartender shouted, "No weapons, this is a fist fight only, or nobody gets paid." That was the rule, and even here, even in this madness, some rules still mattered. More fighters stepped in, fast ones, sharp ones, loud. Ones, some with claws, some with horns, but none of them touched the human. None of them landed a single blow. He moved with a rhythm like he had done this before, not just once, not just twice, but 1,000 times on 1,000 worlds against creatures bigger, faster, stronger, but never smarter, never colder. He used the tables, the chairs, the floor. He used the weight of others against them. He used gravity like it was his friend and pain like it was his language. Aliens began to back away, not from fear of losing, but from fear of something else, something older than fear itself. One whispered, "He is not fighting for fun. He is not fighting for pride. He is fighting because he knows how." Another whispered, "He does not even look angry. He looks like this is normal, like this is sleep to him." One by one, they fell, each in a different way. Some screamed, some whimpered, some just lay still and stared up at the lights above, wondering what kind of creature they had just tried to fight. When the last one dropped, the human stood in the middle of the room, his chest rising and falling slowly, his eyes still cold, his jacket still torn, his knuckles bleeding now, but his hands steady. The room was silent. Even the lights seemed dimmer. The bartender stepped out from behind the counter, his voice quiet and low, like a whisper through smoke. "You want another drink?" he asked. The human looked at him and nodded once. The bartender poured the drink with shaking hands, then slid it down the counter. The human caught it without looking, then walked back to table 9, sat down, and drank like nothing had happened. The rest of the bar began to breathe again. Some whispered, some left, some just stared. The legend had begun, and the fear had just taken root. After the fight, the Red Fong bar became silent. No music, no talking, no bets, just the sound of broken chairs and groaning bodies spread across the floor. The human sat at table 9, still calm, still drinking like nothing around him mattered. But news does not sleep in space, and fear travels faster than light. Within an hour, other aliens started to arrive, not just drunk fighters or gamblers, but real ones, warriors, enforcers, bounty hunters, the kind who do not laugh, the kind who come when whispers grow too loud. They walked into the bar with weapons on their backs, but did not draw them. They saw the bodies, they saw the man, and they understood something was wrong, something was not normal. At the center of it all sat the human, still with the same drink in his hand, eyes cold, voice silent. One of the newcomers stepped forward, a tall alien with long arms and yellow eyes, his armor marked with symbols of many kills. He was not like the others. He watched not with anger, but with interest. He said, "You made quite a mess, human." The human said nothing. The yellow-eyed alien looked at the bartender, who was still cleaning a broken glass with shaking hands, and asked what happened here. The bartender looked at the man at table 9, then said, "They started it, he ended it." The warrior smiled and said, "Maybe he needs a real fight, not these drunken cowards." Another alien leaned in and whispered, "No, he is not just a fighter. He is something else. Look at his eyes. He does not fight because he wants to. He fights because he has to." The warrior laughed and said, "We will see." He stepped forward and sat at the table across from the human, then said, "My name is Gorik. I have fought across 9 systems. I have broken war beasts with my hands. I have survived the pits of Artel and the fire moons of Kray." He leaned closer and said, "I have never fought a human before, but I have heard the stories." Still the human said nothing. Gorik raised his hand and pointed at the broken fighters around them, then asked, "Is this what humans do for fun?" The human looked at him slowly and said they made a choice. Gorik smiled and said, "Then let us make another choice, you and me, a real fight. No tricks, no weapons, no fear, just strength and skill." The human placed his glass down and stood. The bar seemed to hold its breath again. Even those still injured tried to lift their heads to see what would happen next. Gorik stood too, rolling his shoulders, stretching his arms' muscles like cables under thick skin. They moved to the center of the floor. No one spoke. No one blinked. Gorik attacked first, his fist fast like a comet flying toward the human's chest. The human shifted his weight and caught the blow with his forearm, his feet steady, his face calm. Gorik followed with a low sweep kick meant to break balance, but the human jump spun and landed behind him like he had seen the move before 100 times. Gorik turned quick and threw a backhand swing, but the human ducked and stepped inside his guard, his elbow slamming into Gorik's ribs with enough force to shake his whole body. Gorik grunted and smiled and said good. He charged again, fists flying, knees rising, elbows cutting through the air like blades. The human moved like water flowing between strikes, never, still never slow, always watching, always waiting. Then he struck 1, 2, 3 fast, hard, clean. Gorik stumbled, blood at the corner of his mouth, but he smiled again and said better. They kept fighting, not wild, not messy, but sharp and deadly like a dance made for war, each move telling a story, each hit carrying weight. The crowd watched not with cheers, but with silence, with awe, with fear. They saw something different now, not just rage, not just violence, but skill old and deep and trained through pain. The human was not just strong, he was smart. He read his enemy like a book and turned every attack into an opening, every miss into a lesson. Gorik knew he was losing, but he did not stop. He had never backed down, and he would not now. With a roar, he lifted the human and slammed him into the floor. The ground cracked, the room shook. But the human rolled, grabbed Gorik's arm, and twisted, bringing him down in one smooth motion and locking his arm behind his back with perfect control. Gorik groaned, tried to break free, but the pain was sharp and deep. The human leaned close and whispered low and slow, "Your people think we are soft, because we smile, because we trade, because we talk." Then he tightened the lock just enough to make Gorik gasp and said, "But we are from a world that hates us. Every day we survive is a fight. Every breath is earned. And when we fight, it is not for fun. It is because we know no one will stop us." Gorik tapped the floor once, twice, then 3 times. The human let go and stood. Gorik stayed on the ground, breathing heavy, his face pale, his pride broken, but his eyes wide with new understanding. He looked up at the human and said, "Thank you." The human nodded once and walked back to table 9. The crowd stayed silent as he sat and picked up his glass again, the drink now warm and almost gone. The bartender stared, then said to no one in particular, "He is not just a fighter, he is a storm in human skin." And outside the Red Fong bar, new whispers began spreading across the stars, across ships and systems and stations. Whispers of the human who fought with fire in his soul and ice in his eyes. The space station lights flickered as the night shifted into artificial morning, but inside the Red Fong bar the air was still heavy with the scent of blood, sweat, and silence. The human sat quietly again, his face showing no emotion, but his presence louder than any voice. Across the system screens, lit up with footage, someone had recorded the fight from the shadows, and now millions were watching from distant corners of the galaxy. Warriors, merchants, pirates, and even high command officers saw the same thing, a human alone, unarmed, destroying some of the toughest fighters in neutral space. This was not just a bar brawl anymore, it was a message. At the edge of the station, a sleek black ship arrived, marked with a red serpent insignia, feared by many and respected by all. It belonged to the Varn Syndicate, a criminal empire that controlled over 30 sectors and dealt in everything from weapons to secrets. Inside the ship sat a woman, known only as Ma'alra, cold, calculating, and ruthless. She watched the footage and narrowed her eyes. She turned to her second in command and said, "Bring him to me, or bring me his head." Back in the bar, the human felt something shift. He looked up slowly as a shadow moved through the doorway. Tall, armored figures stepped inside one by one, each marked with a red serpent crest. The bartender froze his hands, still on a broken glass, his eyes wide with fear. These were not brawlers, these were death-bringers. The lead figure stepped forward and said, "You are coming with us, human. Our mistress wishes to meet the one who shamed an entire floor of fighters." The human stayed still for a moment, then slowly stood, pushing his chair back without a sound, his drink untouched. He looked around the room. Every alien held their breath. Even Gorik, who now sat at the edge of the room, nursing bruises, did not speak. The human stepped forward and said, "Where?" The lead figure motioned toward the door and said, "Follow, or we make you." The human nodded once and followed them outside, his steps steady, his mind sharp. They walked through the station in silence, through crowded halls and neon-lit markets, where whispers followed their path. People stepped aside and watched the human being escorted by killers without fear. They reached the docking bay and entered the Varn ship, sleek inside, and cold the walls hum with quiet energy. The guards led the human to a chamber lined with silver walls and strange glowing patterns. Ma'alra stood in the center, tall, with long dark hair and eyes like cut glass. She looked at him with no smile, no welcome, only curiosity. "So," she said, "this is the human." She walked around him slowly, her voice smooth, her steps soft, but filled with danger. "You hurt my business," she said. "My fighters fear now. My customers talk of Earth like it is a cursed world, and all because of one man." The human said nothing. She tilted her head and said, "But I do not see a monster. I see a man who sits alone, who waits for a drink, who looks more sad than angry. Tell me, why should I not cut you down and feed your bones to the void?" The human looked at her, then said, "Because your people started something they did not understand." Ma'alra smiled, then said, "Maybe you want to understand. Maybe I want to know what makes a human so dangerous that even Gorik bends his head in shame." She waved her hand, and a screen lit up showing a file marked classified in red lines, his name, his record, his planet, all hidden. "You have no past on any of our systems, no name, no ID, no trace, and yet you fight like you were born in war." The human replied, "Maybe I was." Ma'alra stepped closer, now only inches away, her eyes locked with his. "I offer you a place," she said. "Power, money, weapons, fear. You can lead my armies and become more than a myth." The human shook his head and said, "I am not here for power. I just wanted peace." Ma'alra's smile vanished, then said, "Wrong place, wrong galaxy, then human." She snapped her fingers, and guards moved in surrounding him, weapons raised. Still he did not move. No fear, no panic, just silence. One of the guards shouted, "Get on your knees." The human looked at him and said, "Last chance." They laughed, but one stepped forward, too fast, too sure. In less than a breath, the human moved, twisting, grabbing the guard's arm, slamming him into the wall. The others raised their weapons, but he was already moving again, fast and brutal. One by one, they fell, their weapons torn away, used against them. Sparks flew, blood spilled, alarms rang. But Ma'alra did not run. She stood frozen, watching something she had never seen before. Not rage, not hate, but control, perfect and cold and unshakable. The fight lasted less than 10 seconds. When it ended, the human stood alone again, bruised but breathing steady. He looked at Ma'alra and said, "I do not want war, but I will not kneel to fear." Ma'alra raised her hand slowly, not in threat, but in respect, then said, "I believe you." She turned to her console, pressed a button, and said, "Open the door, let him walk." As the human left the ship, the station around him seemed smaller, somehow, like the stars themselves were leaning in to listen. More eyes watched, now more whispers grew. The legend of the silent man from Earth who destroyed warriors, denied power, and walked free from the heart of darkness. He returned to the bar the same way he left, quiet and calm, and sat again at table 9, where his old drink still waited. The bartender looked at him and said, "She let you go." The human only nodded. And somewhere far beyond the system, a council of alien leaders watched the recordings and asked the same question. What is Earth hiding? The Red Fawn Bar had changed since that night. Whispers filled every corner of the room. Even when no one spoke out loud, eyes would drift toward Table 9, where the humans still sat calm and quiet, as if nothing ever happened. New faces came from distant stars, not for the drinks, not for the games, but to see him, the human who took down a squad of killers and walked away from Iora's ship without a scratch. Some believed he was a weapon built by Earth, some believed he was cursed by ancient gods, and a few thought he was just a man who had seen too much and lost too much to care. But all of them agreed on one thing: never provoke him. In the deep space around the station, 2 warships hovered silent and dark, painted in black with red eyes glowing on their hulls. They belonged to the Scar Dominion, a brutal warrior race, known for burning colonies and taking slaves across star systems. The Scar did not fear stories. They believed strength was shown, not told, and they had heard enough of this so-called human legend. On board one of the ships stood a massive Scar warlord named Gravel, flesh armored with bone tattoos, each one earned from a kill. He had watched the footage and snarled at the idea of a soft-skinned biped beating trained killers. He turned to his crew and said, "Bring me the human alive or broken, I do not care." 2 dropships launched from the warships, flying toward the station, masked by jammers and stealth tech. No one noticed them coming, not even the station guards. Inside the bar, the lights flickered again, a cold breeze pushed through the cracks, and the music died. The bartender looked up, his hands shaking. He knew that feeling, the air before chaos. The human raised his eyes and looked toward the door, his face still calm, but his fingers curled around the edge of the table. With a loud crash, the dropship landed outside, metal claws tearing through the dock. Before anyone could react, the doors burst open and armored Scar warriors marched in, weapons ready, eyes glowing. Everyone scattered, screaming, diving behind tables, or rushing to escape, but the human stood still. Gravel entered behind his warriors, taller than them all, and roared, "Show me the human, show me the ghost who made cowards of killers." The room fell silent. Only the human stood now, face to face with something built for war. Gravel stepped forward, snarling, "You are nothing but skin and bone and noise." The human tilted his head, then slowly stepped out from behind his table. The Scar warriors aimed their weapons, but Gravel raised a hand. "Not yet," he said. "Let me feel this myth break in my own hands." He charged forward, arms wide, voice echoing through the bar, but the human moved first. He ducked under the charge, slid past the heavy steps, and drove his elbow into Gravel's ribs hard enough to crack armor, then twisted and slammed his knee into the back of the warlord's leg, forcing him down. The crowd gasped. No one expected that, not even the Scar. Gravel roared and swung his arm wide, but the human dropped low and kicked his ankle, breaking balance again, then struck his jaw with a clean, sharp blow that made the warlord stumble. But the fight was not over. Gravel rose again, blood dripping from his mouth, now angry, now laughing, now hungry. "Good," he shouted, "better than I thought." The battle grew, wild fists slamming into metal, wood, glass, cracking under pressure, the human using every step, every sound, every shadow. The Scar moved like a beast, but the human moved like a storm, silent, fast, full of purpose. It was not just strength, it was something deeper, something older, like the rage of Earth had grown roots in his bones. The fight lasted minutes, but felt like hours, until finally Gravel fell to his knees, gasping, clutching his side, armor shattered, pride broken. The other Scar raised their weapons, but Gravel lifted his hand and shouted, "No, let him be." He looked at the human and growled, "You have won this fight, human, but you have not seen the real war." The human did not speak, just stared, then turned and walked back to his table, picked up his drink, and sat down again. Everyone watched, stunned. The Scar backed away, dragging their leader with them, their eyes still locked on the man who had once again done the impossible. Outside, the ships retreated, silent, like shadows hiding in shame. News spread faster than light. This time the feeds could not ignore it. No one could. The name Earth now carried something different in alien systems. Not mystery, not curiosity, but fear. Councils met in secret, generals whispered across encrypted lines, and bounty hunters looked at the human not as prey, but as something to avoid. Back at the bar, the humans sat alone again, the crowd slowly returning, noise creeping back in, but softer, more careful. The bartender approached, quietly set down a new drink, and asked, "Why do you stay here?" The human looked at him and said, "This place reminds me of home." And for a moment, just a small one, the bartender thought he saw pain behind those eyes, something deeper than all the broken bones and fallen warlords. He nodded and walked away, leaving the man from Earth alone in the only place in the galaxy brave enough to serve him a drink. But somewhere far away, in a dark corner of the galaxy, another race watched, another force listened, and they did not plan to challenge the human with fists or guns. They had other ways. In the weeks after the Scar Retreat, the Red Fong Bar became something more than just a place for drinks and dirty deals. It became a shrine to the unknown force that lived inside the human, who never gave his name and never asked for thanks. New faces came, daily soldiers, scientists, smugglers, and spies, some looking to hire him, some trying to learn from him, and a few trying to test their luck, but no one dared to throw the first punch, not anymore. The bartender watched from behind the counter each night, polishing the same glass over and over while stealing glances at table 9, where the human always sat with the same quiet stare and the same untouched drink. One night, a woman walked in, tall, graceful, dressed in gray robes with silver eyes that shimmered like stars. She moved through the crowd like wind, and no one stood in her way. Even the loudest aliens fell silent when she passed. She stopped at the human's table and asked, "May I sit?" He looked up, eyes narrow and unreadable, then nodded once. She sat without fear and said, "You do not know me, but I know of you. We all do now." The human gave no reply. She leaned closer and whispered, "I am from the circle of thought. We study threats before they become wars, and we believe you're not just a fighter, you are a sign of something coming." He raised an eyebrow, still silent. She continued, "The Scar were only the first. The next ones will not come with guns or claws. They will come with words, with poison, with silence, and you may not be ready for them." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "I have faced worse than words." She smiled sadly and said, "I believe you, but others will not until it is too late." The bartender noticed something strange. Then the air changed again, colder, sharper, and the lights above dimmed, as if something unseen had entered the room. Without warning, every screen in the bar went black, then lit up with a single symbol, a spiral made of broken stars spinning slowly. Voices began to whisper from hidden corners, voices with no mouse, voices that spoke in thoughts, not sounds, and every mind in the room felt them. "The circle has watched the savage," they said. "The circle sees his rage, his strength, his fear, his guilt, his fire, and now the circle will see his end." The woman in gray stood quickly and reached for a small disc on her belt, but it shattered into dust before her fingers touched it. The human stood slowly, eyes glowing faintly with something not seen, before something ancient and dark like the fire of a dying sun. A shadow appeared in the center of the bar, not a person, not a machine, not even a shape, just a moving tear in the air that bent light and sound and thought. It pulsed once, and the crowd screamed, all except the human and the woman. He stepped forward, muscles tense, jaw locked, fists clenched, ready for anything. The shadow reached out, not with hands, but with force, pulling memories from the air, dragging pain from the past, whispering secrets he had buried long ago. He saw fire and loss. He saw faces he could not save. He saw a sky burning over Earth, and he heard the last cry of his unit before silence took them. But he did not fall. He roared not with his mouth, but with his soul, and the lights shattered across the bar as the floor cracked beneath his feet. The shadow pulsed again and tried to swallow him, but he pushed back each step like thunder, shaking walls and breaking glass with every move. The woman in gray held her breath, watching something no one had ever seen before, not a man, not a god, but something in between. The human reached the center of the room and touched the shadow with one open hand. In that moment, the air burned, the ceiling screamed, and the spiral symbol on the screens burst into flames. The shadow shrieked, twisting in pain or rage or both, and then vanished in a blink. Silence returned heavy and wide as the crowd stared at the man who had once again faced the impossible and survived. He turned back to his table, sat down slowly, and picked up his drink as if nothing had happened. The woman in gray sat beside him, her hands shaking, eyes wide. She whispered, "What was that?" He answered, "Something older than fear, something that hides behind gods, and rulers, something that waits." She said, "And you stopped it." He looked at her and said, "No, I warned it." News of the event traveled like lightning, but this time no footage survived, no sensors recorded it, no feeds captured the truth, only those present remembered, and even they questioned if it was real. The circle of thought withdrew from public eyes, their spokesman silent, their agents missing. Whispers spread that the spiral symbol was found burned into the minds of those who tried to speak against the human, that memory itself bent around him now, that fate did not dare oppose his will. In the Red Fawn bar, things went quiet again. Fewer visitors came, more left after a single look at the man at table 9. The bartender spoke less now, his eyes older than before, and his hands never stopped shaking when he cleaned that table. But still the human came each night, same time, same seat, same drink. Waiting not for battle, not for peace, not for death. Just waiting. And somewhere far beyond stars that had no name, something else waited too. And it was listening. In the farthest system beyond the known maps of the galactic network, a secret meeting began under a silent sky, where stars moved in strange patterns and gravity hummed with unnatural rhythm. 7 alien warlords sat around a black crystal table, their bodies marked with scars from 1,000 battles, their eyes focused on a single shared problem, the human from Earth. Each of them had faced horrors, each of them had crushed rebellions, each of them had made planets scream and beg for mercy, but none had ever seen one man shift the balance of fear, without leading an army, without commanding a fleet, without needing a single weapon. He had simply walked into a bar and changed everything. One of the warlords, a massive creature made of metal and ash, spoke first, his voice deep like grinding stone, and said, "This human is a problem that grows in silence. We must act before his legend becomes law." Another warlord, covered in blue flame, responded, "No, we must understand him first. He is not like the others. His rage, is old as pain, is weaponized. If we strike carelessly, we awaken something worse." A third warlord, shaped like a spider with eyes that blinked sideways, hissed softly, "He is not a warrior. He is a fracture in the pattern. He is not meant to be contained. He is a warning." While they argued, a signal broke through their shields. It was not a message. It was not a threat. It was a sound, one single breath drawn slowly, then held, then released. All 7 warlords fell quiet, their hearts freezing as the crystal table pulsed with heat and light. The sound came again, now louder, the sound of footsteps echoing in a place none of them had seen. The lights dimmed, and each warlord saw something different in the darkness. Each saw their greatest failure, and behind it the same figure, always standing, always watching, always silent. The human. He was not in the room, but his presence was, and it twisted around their minds like a storm without wind. Back in the Red Fawn bar, the human still sat at table 9, his drink still untouched, his eyes fixed on the far wall where no one dared sit. Tonight, the bartender did not speak. Tonight, the crowd was smaller. Tonight, the galaxy held its breath. A new visitor entered the bar, a child no older than 10, with silver skin and bright red eyes. They walked up to the human and held out a small box made of wooden shadow. The human took the box without a word, opened it, and looked inside. His face did not change, but the air did. He stood up quietly, and for the first time, he looked tired, not weak, not broken, just tired, like someone who had fought too long and bled too much. He turned to the bartender and said, "If I do not return, burn this place to the ground." Then he left. No ship waited for him, no escort, no weapons. He walked into the void like it was home, and the stars opened before him. He traveled without time across the forgotten paths where space folds and light whispers secrets only the dead can hear. He reached a place called Null, where laws of life and death reversed, where thoughts bled and reality cracked, where the circle of thought had built its last wall. There he found a door made of silence, guarded by no one, feared by all. Behind it, the thing he had worn, the spiral that watches from beneath time, the creature made of unmaking. The door opened not because he knocked, but because it knew him. He stepped inside, and the universe blinked. Within the chamber was a shape too large and too small, a color never seen, a sound that did not exist. It waited without moving, it watched without seeing. The human said, "I am not here to fight." The thing answered without words, "You already are." The human stepped closer and said, "I am not your enemy, but I will become your end if you touch my kind again." The spiral twisted slowly, not in fear, not in anger, but in curiosity. "You are small and loud, you are broken and burning. Why do you resist what cannot be stopped?" "Because I remember," said the human, "and memory is stronger than fate." The spiral laughed, if such a thing could laugh. It trembled with strange joy and said, "Then show me." The human did not speak. He simply opened himself. Every wound, every loss, every scream, every fire, every hand he could not save, every night he could not sleep, every moment he chose to live instead of surrender. And the spiral screamed, not in pain, but in realization. For the first time it felt something it did not expect: fear. The human turned his back and walked away. Behind him, the chamber fell apart into dust, into silence, into nothing. The spiral did not follow. Back in a Red Fong bar, the lights flickered once, then steadied. The bartender looked up from his glass as the door opened slowly. The human walked in, not tired now, not angry, just calm like the sea before a storm. He sat down at table 9 again, and this time he drank. The crowd watched him in silence. None dared approach, none dared whisper. The bartender asked, "Was it done?" The human nodded. Far across the stars, warlords burned their plans. The circle erased its files, and somewhere deep within the oldest computers of the galaxy, a single line of code appeared, without author, without source. Do not provoke Earth. Do not provoke the human. Do not provoke the rage that remembers. Because when it comes, there will be no mercy. Only silence and fire.